Hey, folks, welcome back to Monks and Punks. We have a very special guest, my friend, Rabbi Andy Kahn. He is the executive director of the American Council for Judaism, and we'll talk about that radical organization. Andy, welcome to Monks and Punks.
Thanks. So glad to be here, Sandra. Thanks for having me.
Sure, man. This is kind of a fireside chat. This is a rare, intimate encounter because I happen to be out in Pennsylvania at my construction project, building the house you can see over my shoulder. So this is your opportunity, listeners, for a fireside chat with kind of a new radical lefty rabbi that everyone should know and love. And so why don't we start by you telling us what is the American Council for Judaism? As I understand it, it's probably one of the oldest anti-Zionist Jewish organizations. Is that semi-accurate?
Yeah, it is. Well, I guess I would say it is insofar as that it has been in continual existence. So it was founded in 1942 when the Reform movement, so the Reform movement is one of the movements of Judaism.
Right.
It was the first to kind of coalesce itself as a movement in America. And so basically every other movement we think of, like the conservative movement and the Orthodox movement and Reconstructionist renewal, that was all mostly in response to the fact that the Reform movement decided to say, actually, we are a movement, right? And when the Reform movement began, it was theologically anti-Zionist in a very explicit way.
Wow.
The theology of Reform Judaism, as it was first coalesced in Germany in the 19th century, and then made its way over here pretty quickly to America. Part of the belief system was that in the shift for humanity in modernity, in which in particular Jews became emancipated in Europe and were able to be co-equal citizens with their neighbors who were not Jewish, that something had shifted. And that actually now that Jews were accepted in these nations, they no longer sought a return to ancient Palestine, a rebuilding of the temple, the coming of an individual Messiah that would hearken to a reestablishment of this ancient mode of being, and instead saw the dispersal of Jews all over the world as actually a plan from the beginning, and that God wanted us to take the Torah all over the world and to bring our own particular ethical enlightenment everywhere, so that through our participation alongside our non-Jewish neighbors in building ethical societies, we would be instrumental in bringing about what would be an messianic era for the entire world, and establishing, in many ways, like if you look back at the writing, it sounds very socialist, like overcoming the differences between the rich and the poor. Because when you read in the Torah the legislation about how about the necessity of providing for all people in society, and there are all of these laws about the return of property every 7 years and things like that. These rabbis in the 19th century and onward saw that that was actually the core of Torah, and that what we were supposed to be doing, rather than trying to build a Jewish nation state, was actually being present where we are to establish more just societies all over the world.
That
and
sounds
the
great.
American Council. Yeah, let me. I'll finish up in just a second. I got
No problem. No problem.
Once I get into the theological talk, it's hard to get me to stop. But in the late 30s, early 40s, Zionism started becoming popular, and the
Right.
Reform movement first made a move towards being accepting of Zionism, not Zionist itself, but just saying like, yeah, they're like, Zionism's okay, because historically people were not accepted if they were Zionist. And then slowly, and then very quickly it became officially Zionist. And the ACJ was established to maintain that traditional stance of a theological anti-Zionism based on the idea that Jews are supposed to be a core part of whatever nation we're living in. That is our home, and that is where we're supposed to be working to improve the world.
This is a question that's kind of coming spontaneously, but since we're both in the DSA, we're both religious socialists. Taking off the identities of our individual religions for a second and just looking at this as international minded socialists, I wonder if the pivot towards the United States suddenly supporting the Zionist project and the founding of Israel, I wonder if that had to do half with, feeling terrible about the Holocaust, and rightly so, but maybe also because we wanted a Cold War expansionist station client state in the Middle East. Is that a part of your historiography?
Absolutely, 110%. The Suez Crisis in the 1950s was a major moment in the kind of like international decolonial movement, right? It was Egypt attempting to wrest this financial um, stake that the Western world had in Egypt as a former colony, right?
Yeah.
And Israel, in that moment, functioned as a proxy state for not just the US, also France and England, to force Egypt to reopen the Suez Canal. And prior to that moment, it wasn't clear which way Israel was going to go in the Cold War. Right, early on in Israel, labor Zionism was the primary force in the country. They
Yes.
were a socialist country.
Yeah.
But that shifted, right? And especially after the Suez Crisis, it became very clear that it was going to function as part of the American European capitalist hegemony in the region, both to enforce um, that stake in the Middle East to make sure that the Soviet Union didn't completely overtake it, and and and, uh, and beyond, really, to keep the Middle East destabilized, right? Especially after you get to the Nixon era and like Menachem Begin, even
Yeah.
Golda Meir.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Also, the thing that I wanted to respond to when you were talking about the Old Testament and a kind of proto-socialism embedded in the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures. We're going to talk about what's the proper term, because I've been roasted by our other rabbi friend about don't say the Old Testament. That's kind of biased, but we'll go there in a minute. But there's a great talk online from Aubrey Hendricks, who is a Columbia professor, African American scholar, and he did a great job of analyzing the book of Chronicles and the story of Ahab and Jezebel, and how
interesting.
Ahab is essentially the story of Trump, like a false religion embracing. Um, Ahab kind of sold out the people and embraced a outside religion that was not the true religion. Um, it's kind of like what Christian Zionism, Christian nationalism is doing. But Aubrey Hendricks also said that in the Hebrew Bible that there was no poverty. That poverty was something that was unheard of. Have you heard that?
So it's interesting. There's a line in Deuteronomy. I can't quote it from the top of my head, so I'm going to have to like paraphrase. Which says there's all of these instructions as to how the Israelites were to create economic equality, or at least economic justice in their society. And it says something to the effect of, and if you do all this, um, you will like make sure that there are no poor, and like the next line says, and the poor will always be with you. So, like, it's this
Which Jesus
interesting,
actually quoted too. It's one of the most enigmatic things he says. Like,
yeah,
wait a minute, are we changing the world or not, dude?
yeah. And I think that, I mean, to me, that says no, of course there is poverty, right? Like, and poverty is a relative thing, of course. Um, but to me, what that says is that there is no perfected world that we can actually get to and then just like, we're done, right?
Right.
Like, which is obviously like one of the big questions that has led to lots of different schisms in Marxism, right? Is like, will there one day be a socialist revolution in which the proletariat actually sees the means of production and is able to establish a like utopia on Earth? Or is actually it is the prescription endless revolution? Like you can never actually get there, so you just have to keep doing it over and over and over again. Um, and like obviously this is like putting two texts in conversation that aren't necessary. They're like from very different times and very different framings. But I would argue that what it's saying in Deuteronomy is like, yeah, your job is to decrease what poverty is as much as humanly possible, and there will always be economic inequality. We're never going to actually be able to fix it completely, which means we can never stop trying, right?
Which
Even
is
if
what
it
the Jubilee
feels,
and the Jubilee, the call to Jubilee kind of
yeah,
calls for a kind of a revolutionary moment once every 50 years, right?
yeah, it's once every 7, and then even more revolutionary every 50,
Right.
right? Every 7 years they had to let the crops lay fallow.
Mm.
And and when the crops were fallow, that meant that like animals could come and eat from them all they wanted, and so could those who did not have fields, right? So could the impoverished, like they could, because they
Oh,
had to lay fallow. But then yes, every 50 years there was a like a super radical like all debt is
all
remitted,
debt, all slaves are freed.
all slaves are
Yes.
freed. And like the craziest part of it is that all land that has been acquired that changed hands over the past 50 years has to go back to its original owner. So
No kidding. That's so crazy.
yeah,
That's a real estate
yeah,
nightmare.
yeah. I mean, like historians think like this action, there's no way this ever actually happened, right?
That was my next
But
question. Did it actually happen?
yeah,
But I guess.
no way, no way. But it's setting up an ideal to strive for, right? Like
Yeah.
if you have a society in which like you just simply can't accumulate that much wealth, right? If every 50 years, if you're like toiling away to accumulate as much land as you possibly can, like if you're like Bezosing it, right?
Right.
Like after 50 years, it goes back to its original owners. So it like
Right.
is almost as if you didn't do it, which will keep people from being too greedy.
Maybe.
Like
Yeah.
if you can't,
Maybe that was the
yeah,
essence
if you
of it.
can't
Right.
keep it, then like what's the point in working so hard for all of it?
Yeah. Well, the scholar Ched Myers, who's a writer and a Marxist Christian, if you believe that, he says
Mhm.
that the idea of Jubilee is running just under the skin of Jesus's core message. So
Totally.
yeah,
I would say
somebody who
Paul
loves.
too, right? Like and maybe, there's an argument for all of the concept of apocalypse being its own sort of jubilee, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
if the jubilee is an idea, or an ideal that's setting up a system to try to create an ideal world, and that the apocalypse coming and Jesus' return and all of that, and Christianity is about bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, right? Like there's something very similar in that.
Yeah. Yeah. We're definitely going to cover the Book of Revelation and the Apocalypse, the unveiling tonight. Um, but I have a sequence in which I wanted to ask you a few things. First
Oh
of all,
sure,
let's
let's
tackle.
go.
Listen, okay, so our mutual acquaintance slash friend, Rabbi Michael Feinberg, who just like usually likes to say, "Just call me Michael Feinberg." he says I always forget to not say rabbi, but I like the term rabbi, teacher. He's taught me a lot. And one of the things he's taught me is don't say Old Testament to a Jewish audience because it seems like it's supersessionist, superseding. It seems that you're kind of saying it's old and therefore not as good as the New Testament? Because I'm going to be asking you about some controversies around some allegations about violence in the Old Testament in a minute. But first of all, if a so what should non-Jewish people speaking to a Jewish audience say? Should we say Hebrew Bible or should we say Old Testament or something else?
So I have a very nuanced take on this as someone who has done a lot of Bible scholarship that probably a lot of other rabbis might not agree with me on,
Good,
but
good. So
which
take
is
it with a grain
fine.
of
They don't
salt.
have to. Yes. So take it with a grain of salt, which is um, when you are talking about the Christian usage of the Hebrew Bible, it's fine to call it the Old Testament. When
Christian
you are
usage.
talking about the Jewish usage of it, it's the Hebrew Bible.
Huh.
Because to me, this book in the first century CE got taken by Christians and it got taken by rabbis and went in two completely different directions on purpose, right? Like, and they knew what each other were doing and they
Mhm.
did something totally different with it. You will hear some people claim that Christian usage of it is somehow an appropriation of Jewish text or something like that. I disagree with that. But the Christian usage of it is completely different than the Jewish usage of it.
Is
So
it?
when you, yeah, when you, because when Christians think about the Old Testament and interpreting the Old Testament, they're seeing Jesus all over the Old Testament, right?
Right. It depends on how you read it, but yes. Right.
Yeah, like they see Jesus in the binding of Isaac, they see Jesus in the suffering servant. There's all
In this,
kinds of
the three
places.
the three guys in the furnace in the book of Daniel, right? They
Yeah,
see
and Daniel, yeah,
right.
right. All kinds of places Christians see Jesus in the Old Testament. When you're using it like that, call it the Old Testament because you're using it for Christian theology. When you're
Right.
talking about how Jews use it, we don't see Jesus anywhere in the Hebrew Bible.
You don't.
We don't see him anywhere in there. And so it's the Hebrew Bible. We see a lot of other stuff in there. And when you read the Midrash and the Mishnah and the Talmud, you'll see what traditionally Jews saw in there. But it's completely different from what Christians see. So like it's one book that's used in two completely different ways. And I don't think that like one is more valid than the other. Um, but it is important to be mindful of how you're referring to it and in what context you're using it.
Got you. I asked an 83-year-old Quaker in Ireland about this because he asked a very provocative question, and the way I answered it at our historical Jesus event back in February got me in a lot of hot water with Union theological people and Rabbi Michael Feinberg. But I later talked to this Quaker in Ireland about should we not say Old Testament. He pointed out that there's a different sequence of the books, that the Hebrew Bible um, has the books in a slightly different order, and there might be other texts that are not always in the
Yeah,
Christian usage of the Old Testament.
it depends upon what Christian denomination you're talking about. Because different Christian denominations have different versions of the Bible, right? Like
Yeah.
Catholics have the Apocrypha and stuff in there as well, and I think some Protestants do too. So like what makes up a Bible varies wildly.
Well, actually, wait a minute. I think Catholics have the Book of Tobit in their Old Testament, but not necessarily like Enoch or Apocrypha like that. If that's what you mean by Apocrypha.
No, but they have like Tobit and Judith and the books of the Maccabees
Oh
and
yeah,
like
okay.
some
Is that
other
Apocrypha?
stuff.
I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah,
that was Apocrypha. I see. I'm raised
yeah.
Catholic, so I thought that was just the good old New American Bible. Yeah, I'm so biased. So, um, speaking of being ex-Catholic, currently Quaker and Zen Buddhist and DSA religious socialist, I want to put a bug in your ear to come back to visit us again at 15th Street. We're doing a really interesting interfaith event in which we're going to be appreciating anyone who has been around the block with different religions, like raised one thing and converted to another, or just journeying or want to learn
Oh,
more. And
cool.
so I think you'd be, since you were at our interfaith event back in November. I think you'd be great just to be
Sweet.
a participant. Come have a free lunch and hang out with us again, and
Totally.
you'd be an honored guest. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, back to Charles Lamb, my elder, my Quaker elder from Ireland. He threw a nonviolent bomb of a question, because at the very end of this historical Jesus event, he said something like, why does the evangelical right cling to the Old Testament so much, the evangelical Christian right, in their Christian usage of the Old Testament? They really cling to it to justify violence, to justify, like we just have seen recently, right? Book of Esther,
Totally.
Netanyahu making outrageous claims that are not true about what is actually in Esther. Did the Persians call for the genocide of the entire Jewish people in the Book of Esther? That's what he claimed. We can go there. You can tell me if he's right or not. I'm
Sure.
setting you up for a softball.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the thing, I kind of screwed up, because I said to Charles Lamb at the very end of this event, I said, like, well, some early church fathers said we should just have the New Testament and get rid of the Old Testament because it's got violence in it. It's got such violence in it. And so that was inaccurate, because it wasn't church fathers. It was one early heretic named Marcion, who said that. And then he was run out of the church on a rail saying that. So I was a little bit inaccurate. But the way I got pilloried was really quite dramatic. There was a professor there from Union Theological who kind of called me a Nazi for alleging that there was something wrong with the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. And he's really more into interfaith and just kind of, I mean, I have to respect the fact that he has done a lot of interfaith work with Jews and Christians. And so he kind of felt I was taking the entire Western civilization back, 1,000 years or something. But so it was a little bit over the top, but it got me looking into violence. I learned a Hebrew word, harem, which means devotion. It can mean devotion to God, but it can also mean devotion to destruction. And there are 6 instances, mostly in Joshua, in the Hebrew Bible, in which God commands harem. It's bizarre to think of God commanding genocidal actions. Michael Feinberg had an interesting reaction to it. He was like, well, these are mythic stories. They're not literal. Other people have said, I think you said, the Jewish people, the ancient Hebrews, didn't actually have the material basis to actually, affect military genocide. But the guy from Union Theological was the most over the top, and he wouldn't even address homophobia in Leviticus or violence in Joshua. And so I know we talked a little bit about this on email, but I wanted to talk to you, live and in person about it too. Just because as a Quaker, our thing is to focus on nonviolence and be voices of nonviolence in the world and try to extract that from the message of Jesus, because it seems pretty core and it's central to a lot of Christian traditions, the nonviolence, trying to break the cycle of violence. And so that's what is important to me. And that's what I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about, to learn more.
Totally. So there is a long-standing tradition of Christians claiming that the Old Testament is violent, that Jews are bloodthirsty, that the Old Testament is this, and to a certain degree, you spoke to this with what Rabbi Feinberg said, or Michael Feinberg, no rabbi, said with regard to
friendly Feinberg,
our friend Michael, with regard to the idea of the Old Testament being superseded by the New, right? Like underneath this idea that there are all of these bad things in the Hebrew Bible that isn't in the New Testament, that supersessionist idea has been used for great violence against Jews 4 millennia.
Right.
So I understand why like someone would react in that way.
Right.
Um, I also like wouldn't. I don't think that it's actually helpful to react in that way because obviously you're not calling for violence or anything bad to happen against Jews.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
asking questions about the difference between the scriptures. Um,
Right.
so, like, that is where he was coming from. That is true. I am not so easily offended. Like, it's like a fine question because that stuff is in the Hebrew Bible, right? Um, and the way that I think about it, is I agree with Michael that these texts aren't literal, and Judaism, historically, if you like look at what rabbinic Judaism did, like I was saying, the difference between how Christianity and rabbinic Judaism treat the Hebrew Bible is it is mined for wisdom without taking it literally. It is a source of divine revelation that needs to be continually and progressively refined for each generation, right? And so we don't throw any of it out, even when we know there's stuff in there that's like on the face of it, not great, because we don't know how it might be useful later. Um, so the book of Joshua in particular, or the idea of harem, because it comes up in Samuel as well. It's how King Saul fails, right? God calls on Saul to commit harem against the Amalekites, and he doesn't do it. And it's why God gets mad at King Saul. Um, and like, I don't think this stuff literally happened. I think these are stories that are attempting to teach larger messages. And the book of Joshua, what it's attempting to teach, I can't tell you. I don't know right now. Um, but there are ways in which my rabbinic predecessors have derived deep meaning from the book of Joshua by looking at the like. To me, I think like from where I'm sitting right now, what is going on in that book is an attempt to show how forbidden it is to adopt idolatry
Right.
uh, for a group of people who struggled mightily with idolatry, right? Like
Right.
we know you go through the rest of the Hebrew Bible, and the reason that the Israelites are exiled and the temple is destroyed is because they wouldn't stop it with the idolatry. And the reason that God tells Joshua to wipe all of these groups out, which archaeologically, historically, we know just didn't happen, is because they were idolatrous and because they were doing other practices, namely, particularly sexual practices around incest, that God was forbidding. And so, if you look at it less as a historical like a history and more as a historical document that's trying to convey a message as to what is important and how we need to learn to engage in the world properly. You see in those commandments for destruction, not the destruction of people, but the destruction of behaviors, right?
Yeah. Can I
Um,
ask you um,
mhm.
if it's if can I interrupt or is it an interruption? It might be
Oh, go
helpful.
for it. Yeah.
How would you define idolatry today?
So idolatry today is very different than back then.
Yeah.
Idolatry today, to me, is putting any like material or is about objectification and
Right.
putting the objectification and commodification of anything above the basic belief that all humans are created in the image of God and deserve to be treated as such.
Right. Right. Yeah. The similarities between what I just had my mind blown with this Aubrey Hendricks video and King, the story, the way he related the story of Ahab and Jezebel, you would love it because um, it's right up, it's right on this point.
Yeah.
So, would you say that capitalism itself is? just this machine that's constantly commodifying and objectifying things?
Yeah, I mean that has been the modern turn, right? And like I'm not one like there are people who are like kind of anti-modernist or like anti-enlightenment or whatever, and
Right,
think that like that whole movement was um, horrible because some of the outcomes have been indescribably horrible. Right?
right,
Like colonialism is an outcome of modernity, and like there's no defense for how the effects of colonialism on the world. Same with like modern slavery. Of course, slavery existed going back millennia, but modern slavery turned it into like this capitalist churn, right? That was way more intense than it had been previously. Um, I think that capitalism, as it has unfolded, because modernity started out as this desire to use, the scientific method and Aristotelian and Platonic philosophy and update it to like the 18th and 19th century, so that we could categorize and understand everything. Um, was consistently about objectifying everything, because like if you by categorizing things you kind of objectify them, right?
yeah.
And what capitalism has done is modified everything that was objectified and then made that the purpose of life.
Right.
And like, are there ways in which like forms of capitalism might have been better than feudalism early on? Sure.
Oh, absolutely. Everything solid melts into air.
Yeah. But like where we're at right now in late stage capitalism, it is just trying to figure out how to commodify every ounce of life into something that can be turned into capital. And like
Yeah.
it's destroying the planet, it's destroying humanity, it's destroying our brains. Like, yeah, I think that ultimately where we have landed with capitalism in this moment is a machine for idolatry.
Right. Right. Amalek, you mentioned Amalek, and
Mhm.
it's funny you mentioned that because in the on the back burner is let's talk about Netanyahu,
Sure.
because one of the things certain people say that after October 7th, the Zionists in Israel never would think of invoking the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. But it turns out, well, I did some research on this, and Netanyahu did actually say,
Oh yeah,
remember what Amalek has done to you." So he was kind of chiding his people to not be like Saul, but to
correct.
commit 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 some fierce
Genocide.
retaliation.
Yeah.
Yeah, genocide. Exactly.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, I know exactly. The G word. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, so and then recently, I gotta say, I was really offended that I've been struggling with the Book of Esther and looking at it, watching YouTube's about it in the especially in the wake of the war in Iran. We had some. I have friends in Tehran and Mashhad who were just on the podcast recently, and but the Book of Esther is kind of funny, talking about this long-standing relationship between the Hebrew people and the Jewish people and the Persian people, the Iranian people.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu said that there was a call to annihilate all the Jewish people in the Book of Esther, but there was actually that was one person who was actually not even a Persian who said that in the Book of Esther. He was a foreigner.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah. He was an
yeah.
Amalekite.
Ah, was he?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And A, again, to go back to the same thing with the book of Joshua, the book of Esther probably is not like it's not a historical book, right? It's
No,
not recounting something that happened literally. It
right.
is again a story from an era after the first exile under the Babylonians. And it is recounting you know, I think that like some of the cultural background is probably right. Like there were Jews living in Persia um, from the time of the Persian Empire conquering the Babylonian Empire,
Yeah, they're
right?
still there.
Like,
There's Jews in Tehran that don't want to go to
yeah,
Israel.
they
Yeah.
don't want to go. Correct. Yes. One of the longest standing Jewish communities in the world. Maybe the longest standing Jewish community in the world, in fact. Um, the what we call the Babylonian Talmud, which is really the core text of rabbinic Judaism. When you think about like what happens in synagogues, what Jews do to practice Judaism, that all comes out of the Talmud. The Talmud cites the Hebrew Bible as its source, but the like actual ways we practice and the ways we pray and the way we do holidays and all of that is laid out in the Babylonian Talmud. Babylonian Talmud was written in Persia. Like it was written in the during the Sasanian rule of the region, and these were all Persian Jews. Um, like Judaism has more history rooted in Persia and with the Persian community than probably almost in like the other longest standing one is the Greeks, but like perhaps the longest standing one relationship that Judaism has with another people. Um,
So listen, in the wake of the Iran
and
war, let's dive into
yeah,
this a little bit. We haven't talked
sure.
about the Iran war. We haven't denounced Trump enough or shaken our fist.
I think everybody
But
knows at this point.
exactly, two DSA guys rapping on on a
Yeah.
podcast. But on the one hand, it seems like there's a lot of hype about anti-Semitism, but on the other hand, I really have to ask: have you witnessed an uptick in anti-Semitism because um, the strange bedfellows of U.S. and Israel foreign policy, the intimacy of this special relationship, really was exposed when Marco Rubio kind of spilled the beans and said we attacked Iran. Right? I mean, it seems kind of like if you're an anti-Semite, it's kind of like your wet dream. If you're like a neo-Nazi anti-Semite who thinks Israel is
Yes,
controlling everything, it's kind of like your dream come true to have Marco Rubio say we attacked Iran.
indeed.
Yeah. So, but honestly, friend to friend, are you feeling or seeing an uptick in actual anti-Semitic attacks?
So, I mean, to me, it's really hard to say. There are so many bad faith claims about anti Semitism out there right now. And the way that anti Semitism and anti Semitic acts are tracked, particularly by the ADL, is not to be trusted. The
Mm,
ADL is a horrific organization that has been used to suppress dissent in America for decades now. They spied on anti-apartheid um, groups during the anti-apartheid work in to end apartheid in South Africa. After 9/11, they were spying on Muslim groups and like reporting to the government. They were like they and what they have been doing recently with regard to making enormous claims. Like I mean, one of Jonathan Greenblatt's most commonly stated phrases is that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. But tell that to the people that founded the American Council for Judaism in 1942, who are all Jews, right? Like
yeah.
it's not.
Yeah.
Um, my guess is that yes, it has, right? Like I think it probably has ticked up because, but it's because of the constant endless conflation of all Jews with Israel by
Right.
Jewish Zionists, Christian Zionists, Israel itself, claiming that all Jews support Israel, that all Jews are like that Israel is our homeland and that we're actually loyal to it,
Right.
and that if you're not, that you're like quote unquote not a real Jew, which is just not accurate. But when you say that over and over and over again and purport to be speaking on behalf of all Jews, and then you see Israel as a state committing genocide, people are going to believe you. Like one thing that I constantly try to remind people of, especially in America, is that Jews make up 2% of America.
Wow.
Percent, right? And so we are a tiny, tiny minority in this country. Most people, I shouldn't say most people, many people have never met a Jewish person in their life.
Wow.
Or if they have, it's in passing. They don't know Jewish people because there's so few of us. We know that humans have a tendency toward bigotry, towards oversimplifying who and what people are, especially those that they identify as other, right? Like, and it's not a good thing, and we should hold people to like greater account to learn about diversity and the differences between different people. But that's not going to happen. And so when you have organizations that purport to speak on behalf of a tiny minority in a country, saying the same thing over and over and over again, people are going to believe that. And if that is a constant conflation of all Jews with the state of Israel constantly, and then the state of Israel starts committing genocide, and, people have been saying Israel's undertaking against the Palestinians is genocide for much longer than the past couple of years.
That's true.
And there are clear arguments for that based
Right.
on the international definition, the Limkin definition of genocide.
Right. Especially stuff like
People are going to believe that, though.
restricting travel, or you
Yeah,
know, the different highways for different peoples. Yeah.
and attempting to destroy a culture,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, that's to me that is like a very obvious thing that has been going on since 1948. I mean, you had Golda Meir very clearly saying that Palestinians don't exist, right? Like that has always been part of the project. My point was that a lot like anti-Semitism has existed and always, like, hopefully won't always exist. It exists in the same way that all bigotries exist, right? Like misogyny is probably the oldest hatred. Like we have this within us as humans, these bigotries.
Right.
Um, what is happening with the conflation of Jews and Israel is that is leading to an uptick in anti-Semitism is in large part because Jewish organizations and the state of Israel are making those conflationary claims. Right? Now, have I personally witnessed an uptick? I have witnessed an uptick in online forums of like crazy anti-Semitic stuff getting posted, but I'm also one who is going to tend to assume that those are also bot farms and random people who are of no consequence saying crazy stuff like they do about everything. So I don't use that personally as a like metric of understanding anything about the world right now. What's happening in like on Twitter or in like anonymous comments on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, right? Like who knows who's behind those? But I do believe that there probably is more anti-Semitism right now than there would have been 10 years ago. And it's primarily because of that work of conflating all Jews with Israel and because Israel's committing a genocide.
Got it. Got it.
I
Good.
just need to say one thing very clearly. Conflating all Jews with Israel is anti-Semitic, even when Jews do it. Just have to say
Ah,
that. Okay.
wait, say it again because I want to make sure I hear it right. Say it again for me.
Conflating all Jews with the state of Israel is anti-Semitic, even when Jews do it.
Ah, interesting. One of the things that we talked about on email, I wanted to challenge you, push back a little bit about on,
Sure.
is you said at one point, yeah, there's a lot of violence in the Hebrew Bible, but there's also a lot of violence in the New Testament. And you said, look at the book of Revelation for one thing. So then I did some more research on Revelation and, what is this highly symbolic, poetic surreal, hallucinatory book actually really doing? And is there violence in Revelation? And so there is like this symbol of um, a lion who turns into a lamb. It's the Lion of Judah. It's Jesus, and he is covered in blood at one point, but it's his own blood. Uh, I don't know how. I'm probably getting into the weeds here a little bit. The point of the book of Revelation, as in my research recently, is to say that the main revelation that it's not Caesar, it's not the empire who is really in charge. That Jesus is Lord. That is the revelation that the Revelation is pointing to try to cheer people up when they were, being uh, oppressed by Caesar, and at a time in
What
which
was going to
Christian.
happen to the unbelievers?
Oh, you mean the Book of Revelation?
Yeah.
Oh, I know. There's only 144 who are going to be saved if you literally take the Book of
What happens to
Revelation.
everyone else?
Yeah, yeah, yes. Yeah, I know. Well, this is why it's so. This is why in Catholic school they taught us don't take the Bible literally.
Agreed.
You're gonna paint yourself into a corner. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that only 144,000 people will be saved, and now there's even more than that in the Jehovah's Witness faith. So they sort of painted
Whoa.
themselves into the corner. That was one funny
Yeah.
thing I learned back in the day. So I'm not here arguing for the literal truth of Revelation, but I do think one of the things that's unique to me about the New Testament, about the gospel of Jesus, is this radical nonviolence. This working class Jewish peasant unites people, creates a movement, a social movement. Going back to Ched Myers, the Marxist social movement is really what Jesus was all about. A campaign, and that campaign was about nonviolence. It was about simplicity. It was about mobility, like living, going house to house and village to village, and doing works of healing, and proclaiming this new kingdom.
That all happens in the Hebrew Bible too.
Does it?
Yeah, where do you think the New Testament got it from? What was Elijah doing and what was Elisha doing?
Oh, Elijah and Elisha were also traveling. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And do you think that Jesus came to bring peace?
I
Because he said
do.
he came to bring a sword.
Okay, that is a selective reading of one thing that he did say. However, to the one thing that he did say, he also said something like, "Don't think I came to bring peace. I came to bring fire, and how I wish to see it burning." He was
Yeah,
definitely a disruptor. He was definitely there to like put the kingdom of God, the rule of God, ahead of even nuclear family relationships, right? So that he was there to
sure.
disrupt nuclear family relationships. And you're right, he did
Yeah,
say something like, he also said to Peter, put away the sword at his moment of truth, when he really could have started a violent revolution and had his movement free him from the clutches of Rome. He said, Peter, put away the sword. He was really doing something highly spiritual by surrendering to God and so, taking all of his will out of his ego, having this Zen moment of pure emptiness and just being connected to all beings and cosmic reality and higher power and surrendering to
totally.
God. Yeah,
I guess what I'm saying is that like it's all about how you're going to interpret it, right? I'm not saying your interpretation is invalid. I think your interpretation is very valid and great. And I think that the same is true of the Hebrew Bible. It depends upon how you understand the context of the books themselves, what you think they are trying to impart. I mean, like one could argue there's great violence in the Gospels that's done to Jesus, right? Like
that's true. In that sense, you're totally right. You're totally right. Yeah. I mean, witness
like
how you could really yuck it up with a Hollywood film if you wanted to be Mel Gibson,
if you
and
wanted to, if you wanted to make a
and
whole bunch of money, yeah.
yeah. I learned a lot about anti-Semitism from that film, because there was actually
Oh
a
yeah.
Catholic scholar in Boston with the anti-Semitic awareness committee in the Catholic Church of Boston, and I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't see it that way, but I kind of realized there's a lot of anti-Semitism in that film.
Totally.
Yeah. So, so good. Is there anything we didn't cover that we need to cover, or do we want to stay on this topic more? Or is there another topic, or what? Where are we at? Let's see. What time is it? Oh my Lord, we've gone on for like a whole hour. Amazing.
Yeah,
The time has flown by, and as you can see, my light is dying here. I got to throw another
it
log on the
is.
fire. My light is dying, Fräulein. All right. That's a line from Raiders of the Lost Ark, another great film. Actually, I don't know if you can see this, but I've been cooking some potatoes here in the fire. That's
Oh,
my.
nice.
I got a little pack of spuds. I'm gonna eat. I threw in some iced tea to steam them with, and some Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce. And
Ooh,
yeah, so we
yeah.
open. Shall we open this up? See what it's like.
Do it.
This is like I've been watching a lot of Jacques Papin on YouTube. I'm Jacques Papin, and I am cooking at home. I made some great omelets for Sophie the other day because my omelet game totally got stepped up by watching Jacques Papin. So this is an endorsement, people. If you're listening to the podcast and you're looking for cooking tips, well, you've come to the right podcast once again for cooking tips. Because anyway, the omelet show with Jacques Papin was amazing. But is there anything we didn't cover that we need to cover?
Um, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like we had a lovely conversation about the differences in Jewish and Christian approaches to scripture. I think I got to kind of explain my stance on what the quote unquote violence of the Hebrew Bible is about, which is particularly like a it was these books aren't to be read literally, and B,
Yeah.
they're set in a particular time and place. And Judaism has always been about reinterpretation and reinterpretation and reinterpretation to try to pull meaning out of our earlier sources into today. And so it's not about just reifying what came before, but continuing to progressively um, focus on the values that are most relevant in our time and place, that are rooted in scripture and have been carried through by rabbis for millennia, who have been continually interpreting and reinterpreting what's in the Holy Scripture. Um, and so it's not about literalism. There's nothing within the book of Joshua that should lead one to think that it is to be um, undertaken literally again, right? Like, there's no reason that one reading that would think, like, yes, this is an ideal that we should undertake again, unless someone was looking for an excuse to commit genocide, right?
Right.
Which, has been done throughout Christian history with the Bible as well. Just plenty of examples to cite. But that doesn't mean that Christianity is then only that, or even tainted by that. Is that was one move that Christians made with the tradition in one place and time that we can now repudiate, just like what's happening now in Israel, ostensibly in the name of Jews around the world, and it should be repudiated by Jews around the world. And there have been other moments when Judaism has been used for bad actions as well. Back in the Second Temple period, there was a forcible conversion of the Idumeans. We learned that was bad, and we shouldn't do that anymore, and we didn't do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my take on the idea of violence in the Hebrew Bible.
Got you. And I learned a lot about Hebrew Bible versus Old Testament, and that both are useful terms, um,
Mhm.
and that especially if it's Christians talking about the Christian use of the Old Testament, that's where Old Testament is most, I guess, accepted, or most commonly accepted, and
Yeah, or most accurate, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, for Christians, the Old Testament is all about leading up to Jesus, right? Like it is the prelude to the story of Jesus. Oh, you're getting smoked out, my friend.
Yeah, I'm getting my fire is. I got to get the flames to start up again, and then I'll have some better light here. But by the way,
Okay,
I got my potatoes. My potatoes are. Look at that,
nice.
people! Barbecue
They look
sauce
amazing.
and iced tea,
Yeah.
potatoes. Yes, Andy, thank you so much for doing this podcast with me, and thank you for the
Yes,
unusual
absolutely.
setting, being around the campfire with me, brother. Thank you for keeping me company out here. It's just you, me, and the tree frogs. I don't know if you can. Can you hear the tree frogs?
I can't. I wish I could.
They're going like this. Beep, 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 beep.
Yeah.
It's amazing. They're just
Oh, I
they
heard him. I did hear him for just a second.
yeah. Love me, love me, love me. That's what they're saying. Let's have babies, baby. That's what they're saying. Yeah. And it's they're doing their thing. In Zen, we call it the metta sangha, the life all around us that's doing their Zen practice.
Beautiful.
All right. Well, I hope we can see you again at our interfaith
Yeah,
discussion
would
event,
love to.
June
Yeah, send
28th.
me the info.
I will, Andy. Thank you so much, buddy.
Yeah, let's talk soon. Bye, Sander.
Bye.
Power hates the truth when it comes from below. This channel is about how people fight power in politics, in religion, in the streets, and in everyday life. We cover democratic socialist races, Palestine, and the genocide in Gaza, Quaker resistance, peace work, and the long tradition of nonviolence that refuses to disappear. Because politics doesn't only live in elections, it lives in housing, in labor, in building things with your hands, in culture, and sometimes in loud, unapologetic punk rock. At the center of this work is the Monks and Punks podcast, a podcast about fighting power with all your heart. If you care about politics, Palestine, peace and nonviolence, housing justice, culture, or building a life that doesn't bow to power, this channel is for you. This is not commentary for spectators, it's for people who still believe ideas and human courage can change things.